Welcome to episode 29 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on March 14th, 2020. This is our season opener. Surprise! I was going to take an extra week off, but I'm back on schedule after all. I've had a lot of time on my hands over the last week, so I thought I'd go ahead and roll forward with a new episode. There are some adjustments I was going to make to the recording process that probably won't happen until the end of this new 14-episode season, but that's okay. I'm not sure I would have gotten to them this week anyway. And in the meantime, so much is going on that I thought it might be nice to just move forward with what has become my routine and what has probably become routine for some of my listeners. I am going to talk about the reasons for this briefly, so if you are filled to the gills with everything that's in the news, maybe skip ahead until you hear the first song, and I won't talk about it again after the first music break. I am, of course, talking about all the semi-quarantining that has been going on in the United States because of the coronavirus, or COVID-19. Businesses and local governments have made decisions to cancel events for a few weeks. Religious meetings have been canceled, some travel has been banned, and people are increasingly working from home or doing school at home. I think that this is a wonderful show of solidarity. People have been making the decision to stay at home in a situation where the chances are good that we are all going to get the virus eventually, but being a little inconvenienced for a few weeks will hopefully mean that medical treatments for the most vulnerable will be more effective. Please be mindful of the children in your life and focus on the positive things people have been doing and the kind motivations behind them. Limit exposure to the media for them and for you. The 24-hour news cycle has been disastrous for our sense of well-being. Remember proper self-care and turn off the news and focus on things that make you happy, like knitting and podcasts and listening to knitting podcasts. The other day, I hosted an online knit together for anyone who wanted to join, not just patrons. I will be hosting another Knit Together this coming Thursday from 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I will post the link to enter on Facebook, Instagram, and Ravelry. So join the Facebook and Ravelry groups called I Thought I Knew How Podcast and follow I Thought I Knew How on Instagram and check in on Thursday to get the link. You just need a computer or a handheld smart device. When you click the link, Zoom will walk you through logging in, and in just a moment, you should be in on the conversation. It is really nice to be able to see participants, and none of us are models with hair and makeup teams at the ready, so please don't feel shy about turning your camera on. Once you're in the chat, if someone comes in to talk to you in person or you have to take a phone call, click the mute button on the screen or tap the space bar and that will mute you, and then do the same thing when things are quiet on your end again and we'll be able to hear you again. I may need to step away a few times. It is, after all, a 7-hour stretch that we will be hanging out for. When I do that, I just leave the chat running. The only rules are that you are not allowed to talk about elections or viruses, and you need to keep it classy. Last time, every hour, I shared a positive news story, and every now and then I put out a topic for us to talk about. This time, I think we will spend some time talking about our favorite books. So start thinking about that. Fiction, nonfiction, cookbooks, knitting books, audiobooks. And then, of course, we'll see what else we want to chat about. Be sure to bring some knitting or another craft project to work on while we meet. While we are being asked to generally still avoid people in high-risk groups to avoid spreading the virus to them, I will continue to host these online knit-togethers on Thursdays. So maybe just this one coming up, maybe for the next month, who knows? Patrons, we will still have a patrons-only chat this month. Please check the feed over on Patreon for that information. Okay. We have enough outlets for talking about the virus in our lives already. I'm going to stick a pin in that, and we will not talk about it again in this episode. We need a mental break from it. So let's turn our attention back to knitting and fibery crafts, and let's start with a song. This song is from Anita Stemper, and I have played a few songs for you from her in the past. This one has been sitting in my folder of songs I like and want to share for ages. And I haven't had a place to put it in the show yet. And it doesn't particularly fit any theme or anything about this episode, but I just really like it and I want you to hear it. And it feels like a good time to just share this thing just because I like it. So this is Anita Stemper singing Static.
Step back from the mess you've made. Load up and take your aim before more lies are told. Someone said it was all a game, but no one ever wanted to play. So take the cards and fold.
Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Maria Lisa and Michelle for becoming patrons since the last episode. Getting those notifications in the last week were rays of sunshine. I truly appreciate all my patrons and the encouragement that your support represents. I'd also like to say thank you to DNC Shaha and AMC Bell for leaving kind comments when you reviewed the podcast on iTunes, and to others who left starred reviews. Taking the time to do that helps increase the visibility of the podcast in searches, so I really do appreciate you taking the time. If you'd like to know ways you can support the show, I'll have that information at the end of the episode, or you can hop over to ithoughtIknewhow.familypodcasts.com/help. I have had a very productive couple of weeks on the knitting front. First, I finally got around to dyeing some of the fiber I bought for the Shave 'em to Save 'em initiative. I went online and asked for suggestions for things that I had in my kitchen that I could use to dye with, and someone suggested food coloring. I have a lot of that on hand. I used to decorate cakes. Not well, but I gave it an honest attempt. Anyway, I had quite a few shades of those Wilton paste dyes in my kit and decided to use those. So in a nutshell, you heat up a large pot of water, add some vinegar and the dye, give it all a good stir, and then add the hanks and let it stay just under a simmer until the dye water is clear. That is a very nutshell explanation. I will put the links to the videos I watched on YouTube in the show notes in case you're curious about trying this. I started with the Gulf Coast native yarn in some burgundy, but I wasn't completely happy with the results. I guess if the food coloring you're using has red as one of the component colors, it will separate out. And also red absorbs faster than other shades. So initially there were very bright red parts and sort of brown parts. And I really wasn't happy with it. So when the water had gone clear, I took the yarn out and added some violet to the water and immersed the yarn again. So the resulting yarn is now a reddish purple with areas that are a little more purple and areas that are a little more red. And I decided I could live with that. So that came out of the water and got well rinsed and squeezed out. And I hung it to dry on a weeping cherry tree we have by the back door. After dyeing it in the violet, the water was not completely clear. So I just added a hank of Whitehorn Dorset and I got some interesting results. First of all, the water was just slightly blue as I put the yarn in, and there were bits of the red dye around the sides of the pot. I had read in the past, and it's actually still common practice in the Philippines, that when your white clothing is starting to yellow, you can add some blue to the rinse water as you wash it, and that little bit of blue will counteract the yellow and make your whites look bright again. I remember sometimes seeing young men in the Philippines who had gone a little overboard with the blue in the rinse water and ended up with blue shirts instead of brighter white shirts. But anyway, the effect was the same with the Whitehorn Dorset wool. The slight amount of blue in the water took the wool from a light cream to a truer white. But then also where the yarn had touched the sides, it picked up some of the red dye that had separated out. So that hank ended up being a very pale cream with sections of pink. It is really pretty, and I'll be thinking carefully about how to use that one because it's quite lovely. I did 2 other hanks. The Florida Cracker I dyed Buttercup Yellow. And then that dye water still had lots of yellow left in it, but it was much brighter after the Florida Cracker came out. So I put the Clenforest in and I figured that would turn out, a bright yellow. But then I decided I had some leaf green paste food coloring and I thought that would be nice to try and dye just like one side of the hank green. So I mixed up a slurry with the water and vinegar and the paste, and I poured it into one side of the pot. And the video made it look like, you just pour it in and the color will stay in that section of the pot and dye that yarn in that section, that green color. But I think that my dye water was too hot by then because when I poured the green in, it just migrated all throughout the pot. And yeah, but that's okay. The Clenforest ended up being a bright yellow with a sort of like a slightly acid green tinge to it. It's actually really pretty and it goes really well with the Buttercup Yellow that I dyed. So all of the hanks were washed and squeezed as best I could squeeze them and hung up out on the cherry tree to dry, and they felt very joyful and springy out there hanging in the wind. I have not knit with any of them yet, but I am in active planning stages for all of them. I also finished the Frozen Skies shawl. You can see pictures of that in the show notes at the website or in my Instagram account. I knit that with Manos del Uruguay Fino, which is a merino and silk blend fingering weight, and Cabrito, which is a lace weight mohair polyamide blend. The Fino is a blue-gray called Silhouette, and the Cabrito is the Tiza colorway, which is mostly white with sections of blue-gray and red. And I kind of wonder, after my adventures with dyeing, whether it was dyed in the mostly exhausted dye bath after some purple yarn was dyed, because the effect is almost the same as that second skein that I dyed, the Whitehorn Dorset with the pink and the slightly brighter blue. Anyway, I don't know. That's just my theory. Fairmont Fibers sent me the yarns to review, and I picked the pattern because the shawl is worked in stripes of different stitch patterns, and I thought the yarns would work well together in that sort of streaky, stripy, textured look. So I have knit with Fino before, so I already knew I loved it. It's a single fingering weight, and it stays together nicely. It's not splitty. And it has a nice gentle luster to it without being shiny, and it drapes really well. So it's really everything you want in a shawl yarn. The Cabrito I was hesitant about because it's a fuzzy mohair yarn. I had given up on fuzzy mohair yarns about a decade ago. I find them messy. I end up with hair in my face and mouth, and they are a pain to rip back if you make a mistake. It just didn't seem worth it to me. But I am glad that I gave it a go because I think the Cabrito has changed my mind. I don't know that I'd knit with any mohair yarn, but I was very happy with the Cabrito. It did shed, but not as much as the mohair yarns I last used. And I did sadly make a few mistakes and have to knit back. But I discovered this time that if I actually knit back rather than taking the work off the needles and pulling on the working yarn, it was completely doable. Having the work still on the needles prevented some of the tangling that happens when you have to undo mohair. And when it did start to snag, I just ran my finger through the tangle and the fiber separated and it was fine again. The finished shawl is amazing. I forgot how light and warm mohair is. It sits on my shoulders and feels almost like it's hovering over them, like it's just barely touching me, but it's still so snuggly. I am really pleased with how it turned out. I was really happy with the yarns and really happy with the finished item. All the info about the shawl will be in the show notes in case you want to have a closer look. I had a happy mail day. My new spindle arrived in the mail. It came from Akerworks and was completely flat packed, and I have not even opened it yet. I have been so busy with other things, but just knowing it's here made me so glad. I just have too much on my needles right now, and I know enough to know that I do not know what I'm doing with a drop spindle yet. So it's best if it just lives in its packaging until I'm sitting with someone who can show me how to use it properly, because otherwise I'm just going to make a mess of the fiber I bought to learn with. On my needles is a test knit of a skirt pattern for Morehouse Farm. More details on that will follow when it's done, but I would like to say right here, right now, that merino wool knit in a 1x1 ribbing is one of the most squishable things you will ever touch. I keep pausing to smush the skirt. I can't help it. It just feels divine. I'm really looking forward to wearing this thing. And as of recording, I am on my second day of a knit along with Morehouse Farm in their Facebook group called the Morehouse Merino Flock. We are knitting the Grown Together mittens designed by Aino Vickman. They are genius. Both mittens are knit at the same time, and you start at the edge of the mitten along the thumb side. So you cast on using a Turkish cast on, which allows you to knit up both sides of the cast on without there being a ridge. Where you cast on is the outer thumb side of the mitten, and then think about having a set of mittens in front of you on the table. And you set them down so that the mittens are facing away from each other with the cuffs together and turn so that both of the thumbs are on your side of the table. That is how you knit the mittens. You start by knitting the thumbs down to the cuff, but the cuffs are connected to each other and you knit across the mittens to the thumb on the other side. And then you knit across the mittens towards the pinky edge. And when you're done and everything's bound off, you steek the connection at the cuff. It's crazy and mind-bending, but it's also super cool. I keep thinking to myself as I knit that I'm going to have to knit another mitten when I finish. But no, that is not true. You knit the pair together and cut them apart. It's genius. There is a bit of color work through the middle of the mittens to keep it interesting, but that's really optional. Or you could design your own color work pattern if you like. Check it out on Ravelry, the Grown Together Mitts, or hop over to the Morehouse Merino Flock group on Facebook. All the videos will be there for you if you decide to do the knit along, whether the knit along's still going on or not. One thing I got over last year was the use of knitting machines to knit the boring parts of projects. I don't actually have my own knitting machine yet, but I have my eye out for one. And that one might end up being the 3D printed circular sock machine from Ashcroft Makers. Finn makes them on her 3D printer, and they are all tested before being shipped out. They are amazing. There are 3 different size discs to go into it, so you can knit socks of different sizes. They are so cool to see in action. She's posted some videos to the Ashcroft Makers Instagram account if you want to see it working. Go to the show notes for this episode and click through to Ashcroft Makers website to check out the machine. Don't forget to pop over to see her growing range of yarn colors as well. They are gorgeous. Patrons, grab the link on the patron feed and don't forget to use your exclusive coupon code for 10% off your order. And thank you to Ashcroft Makers for supporting the show. I do have one more project on my needles that I just started last night. Last summer, while I was in the warehouse area of Webs, also known as yarn.com, I was scoping out their super discounted yarns, and I noticed that they had big plastic bags full of tangled up yarn for sale for $5. None of the yarn in the grab bags had labels on them anymore. They were all clearly partial skeins or yarns that had been discontinued. And while they were on the shelves in the discontinued area, they'd gotten all tangled with each other. So they just get stuck in a bag and sold for $5. But they had one bag full of blues, whites, and grays, and one bag full of really cheery colors. So I grabbed them both. They sat in my stash until the other day when I found myself feeling like I needed to put something right. There were too many cancellations coming my way and so many questions about what the next few weeks would look like. And really, I just needed to exert some organizational control over something. And the grab bag yarns came to mind. So I dumped them both out on my floor and got to work. It was clear that someone had tried to wind up the balls of yarn already, but had gotten stuck. And some of them had been wound really tightly. Quickly, one thing my mom taught me while winding up yarn is to lay a few fingers over the ball of yarn and wind over them. And then every 20 wraps or so, pull your fingers out from under the wraps and reposition them on the ball of yarn and wrap over them again. It just gives the yarn some extra room to relax into so you don't wind up stretching your yarn out of shape. But I digress. It took me about 2 hours to get the tangles all dealt with. Luckily, no one had come along and tugged at the yarns in the tangles, so it was all loose enough that it came apart much easier than I imagined it would. I ended up with everything from what appears to be an Angora blend lace to what I'm pretty sure is Brown Sheep's Lamb's Pride bulky. There are candy-colored ribbon yarns and a few standard workhorse wools. My intention when I bought the grab bags was to see if I could take each bag and make something using all the balls in one of the bags together. But as I got it all wound up, I realized that there was some overlap between the two bags. So for instance, the white and gray and blues bag had some white ribbon yarn in it that made much more sense for the other bag that was mostly ribbon yarns in bright colors. So I sorted everything roughly by fiber content. This was mostly guesswork because there were no labels, but by smelling for animal smells and looking for little acrylic glints in the light and just general feel, I think I got them roughly sorted into animal fibers and blends and man-made fibers, cottons and blends, and some bulky yarn. Once the sorting was done, it occurred to me that I really had enough to do a project with each of the piles. So I rewrote my intentions for the yarn. Rather than doing 2 big projects, I am aiming for 5 smaller ones. There's been a pattern that I've been eyeing that I heard about at Knit Club called the Stitch Sampler Shawl. I was teasing a friend that we'd race to knit it, and my first thought was to use my Shave 'em to Save 'em yarn for it. But as I looked at the animal fiber pile, it occurred to me that I had enough to knit the shawl from what was in the pile. It is what it sounds like. You cast on well over 200 stitches. I went with 285, and I did it on size 9 needles. The pattern is written for Aran yarn using size 10, but most of the yarn in the animal fiber pile is worsted or smaller. So I went with a size 9 needle. It's a rectangular shawl, and you change the yarns and stitch patterns periodically. There's some slip stitch sections, drop stitch sections, and knit purl patterns. The jumble of stitches and yarns looks homey and individual, and I may only ever end up wearing my version of it at home, but I think it will be well loved even if that does turn out to be the case. Some of the yarns in the pile, though, were lace weight and wound into balls, so I decided to rewind them using my ball winder so I could work with both ends and end up with a thicker yarn more in line with the size of the rest of the yarns in the pile. So there were 3 small balls of this stuff, and as I started rewinding the first, I found that whoever had wound the lace weight had started the ball as a ball of the Lamb's Pride bulky and then wound the lace weight over it. And all 3 of the lace weight balls ended up being like this. This wasn't the end of the world. It means I have more Lamb's Pride bulky to work up into a hat or something, but it also means I have less of the super soft, possibly Angora blend lace weight to work with in the stitch sample shawl. And at that point, I went ahead and rewound all the balls on my ball winder, though, just to make sure that I knew what I was working with. There were no other hidden cores to the balls of yarn, but because of the ones that had different yarns in the middle, I decided to turn to my scrap basket and pull out a few woolly partial skeins to go with the project. So the leftovers from my Frozen Sky shawl will now be part of this project, as well as a mystery ball of lace weight that appears to be a kettle-dyed single that I think may be some Manos del Uruguay that I got in a yarn swap ages ago. It's a classic blue, like what you'd find in a box of crayons, and it fits with all the other blues and grays and such in the grab bag. Altogether, I think it will work. Like I said, it might not be something I wear out of the house much, but it should be warm and comforting and do its job. The whole experience with this grab bag project had me thinking about chaos and order and surprises, good and bad. I finally got started on the grab bags because too many things felt like they were out of my hands. But in the course of trying to put things right, it took time and patience. If I'd just jerked at all the partially wound balls, the tangles would have locked in place. It took a bit of teasing, and sometimes I needed to lead the ball on a winding course through the tangle to get the end unlocked so it would continue to come free. And then when I thought I was done, there were more surprises. What seemed like decent amounts of lace weight were hiding cores of wound up bulky, and these unexpected hidden balls of bulky yarn that was the opposite of what I thought it was made me have to take stock and draw from the bits and pieces from projects before. Is it weird that I think that there are lessons to be learned here, or at least a reflection of how life sometimes plays out? There are tangles to be set right, and sometimes things aren't what we think they are, and we have to take stock and figure out a new plan. But also, sometimes by working through the tangles, we end up with more than we expected on the other side. Anyway, musings from this time of low-grade uncertainty. I have a song for you by Anthony Lohan that touches on this same sense of wanting to bring order to get past the unexpected. This is We Will.
Everything we've done's gone wrong, let's break it down and try again. Live your life and love your friends and give yourself a chance to win. Break down all the walls you see and build them in a way that's free. We will, we will, we will, we will, we will. We're far away from anything I want to be or want to see. This broken sense of freedom speech, the one that hates, the one that sees. Let's change the way we fill our days, replace them with some brighter ways. We'll take the things we've learned to love and build from there to get past here. We will, we will, we will, we will, we will. Change the things in life you hate and leave the things you love the same. Everything in life can be everything you want to see. Time is ticking, clocks are turning, nothing stays the same for long. Everything in life must be the way you think you want to leave. One day we will die and see that everything in life's a treat. You'll see, 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 you'll see. you've done's gone wrong, let's break it down and try again. Live your life and love your friends, and give yourself a chance to win. Break down all the walls you see and build them in a way that's free. We will, we will, we will, we will rebuild. We will, we will, we will rebuild. Rebuild, we will.
A few more things before I go. Spring is here. Pretty sure of it. I was out for a run this afternoon on the Rails to Trails and had my headphones in as I listened to podcasts. And with my headphones in my ears, I could hear the frogs singing in the vernal pond down the hill from the trail. So when I got home, I grabbed my portable recorder and went back and climbed down to the pond. And then I had to sit for a good 10 minutes because I had scared them all silent. But it was nice to be off the path and see all the signs of spring. When the frogs started singing again, I got a recording of them. If you haven't quite reached the frog singing stage of spring where you are, or if you are in the southern hemisphere, or if you are a city dweller and don't know what I'm talking about, listen all the way to the end. At the end of the theme music, I'll tack on the frog singing. To those of you who listen to this as you go to sleep and may be woken up by the shift in soundscape, I apologize in advance, but I just get so happy when I hear the frogs singing because I know that spring is finally on its way. We are going to be doing a very low-key knit-along for April. We will start on April 1st and end on April 30th. The goal is going to be to tackle our unfinished projects. I will talk about it more in the next episode, which will come out on March 30th. However, to get you prepared, I'm going to repost the 14-day Yarn Stash D-Stash challenge that I ran at the end of last year on my Instagram. You'll be able to see those challenges on Instagram, Facebook, and Ravelry. If you want, you can go back on my Instagram feed and see them all at once, but I will be reposting them on a daily basis as well. In the next episode, we'll talk about some methods you can use to get yourself through those pesky UFOs and move on into spring with your crafting heart a little more open and free. This is usually where I tell you about the things coming up on my calendar, but everything for the foreseeable future has been canceled. But my parts in some of those things have just been postponed and shifted elsewhere. We are still going to have some knitting trivia coming up, but it is going to be shifted to the Morehouse Open Farm Day, which is scheduled for June 6th. Same deal, for a $5 donation to the Shetland MRI Scanner Appeal, you can enter the knitting trivia contest to possibly win a gift certificate to Morehouse Farm. I've also been invited to go to Knit New Haven on June 13th for Worldwide Knit in Public Day, where I will have a little information table about the MRI Makers and the Shetland MRI Scanner Appeal. So come say hi there. If you've been by Knit New Haven, you know that they have yarn bombed the area outside of their shop, and that all gets updated on Worldwide Knit in Public Day, so come do your bit for that. More information on all of that will come in time. I am still hoping to be able to do my trip to Wales at the end of April, and hopefully Wonderwool will still be going forward. If so, let me know if you'll be attending too, and we can maybe see about getting together for lunch on one of the days. As long as I'm allowed to fly to Wales, I am still planning on going. Wonderwool was just one reason why I wanted to go. I am looking forward to seeing the countryside and hadn't planned on any other large gathering type events while I was there, so I'm moving ahead with those plans at this point. Thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, please visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a monthly pledge, or consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors on the website, IThoughtIKnewHow.familypodcasts.com, where you can also find the show notes for each episode, or you can help out by leaving a 5-star review and kind comments wherever you listen to this podcast, and please tell your friends. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on Ravelry and Facebook are both called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.